For those of you just joining us, we're going to wait a moment or two just to let everybody in. Okay, we are still being joined by people, but good afternoon and welcome to the first webinar from the High Streets Task Force. We're going to start just with a housekeeping information so that it explains how we're going to work this afternoon. Tom.
Yeah, thanks, Simon. Hopefully many of you will be accustomed to Zoom, but we're using the Zoom webinars function. It's very simple to use, so you'll just see a little bar at the bottom with the little picture that you can see on screen. Q&A, chat, and raise your hand. There's a lot of you on the call today, so we won't be using chat, but if you do have any specific questions, please type them in the Q&A. Either Simon or one of the panelists today will pick up the questions where we've got gaps in the schedule for questions. We've got 2 or 3 scheduled breaks for questions, so we'll pick up as many as we can, but any that we don't cover off, we'll cover at the end and in any post comms relating to this webinar. We'd just like to do a quick test. There is a lot of you on the call, so if I could just ask everyone to raise your hand just so we know that you can hear us. That's a lot of hands, so good to see. Thank you everybody for participating in that. And I think with that, Simon, I'll just pass back over to you.
Thank you, Tom. Good afternoon, everyone again. I am Simon Quinn. I'm the Executive Director of the Task Force. And today's webinar is the first in a series of 5 looking at the route map to town centre transformation. As you'll be well aware, our town centres were facing challenges before COVID. That is why the Task Force exists. It forms part of the support that is being given by government to high streets, alongside things like the Future High Streets Fund and the Reopening High Streets Safely Fund and other initiatives. The Task Force started its development in July 2019. We will operate until June 24, but we only launched our generally available support last week. And so you're going to hear in a moment from the chair of the Task Force and one of our team who will tell you a little bit more about the role and the support that we offer. Much of this webinar series and the support we offer online will have relevance to town centres across the UK. But I want to be clear that because the Task Force is funded to support town centres in England, when we refer to government guidance or funding, it will not be relevant to you if you're not in England, and you should check your local position. COVID has obviously impacted the support needed by high streets. It has temporarily changed how we're going to be able to deliver it. But the lockdown was more extensive. It effectively caused the closure of the high street economy. Despite the government support, we think not all businesses will reopen. There will be further challenges about the viability of businesses that do return, not least impacted by social distancing requirements. This is already having a significant impact on property values in town centres. The challenges of high streets have become greater. The series of webinars is about achieving transformation. It will explore what this means, why now is the time to be starting that journey, and our expert speakers over the 5 sessions will highlight and explore steps that would enable this achievement. Today's session will introduce the roadmap to transformation. It's the second framework the Task Force is using to help town centres respond to COVID. So we will also run through the COVID-19 recovery framework and how it has been applied to provide context. So I'd like to introduce today's panelists. And as well as myself, Mark Robinson is the chair of the Task Force. Matt Davis is our lead on communications. Lisa Carlson is from Canterbury BID, the chief executive, and Kathy Parker is our research lead within the High Streets Task Force. So our first speaker is Mark Robinson, who is our chair. Mark.
Fantastic, thank you, Simon, and welcome to so many people. We're suitably humbled and overwhelmed. Given that this is my debut as chair and the amazing attendance, I thought I'd take the opportunity of sharing 3 things with you. Firstly, introduce who I am. I see a number of very familiar names in the attendees, but there's many people I have yet to meet. I'll explain my motivations, why I'm really proud, excited and optimistic to be involved in the task force, and then hopefully share some high street success stories that will inspire your journey with us to deliver change to your communities. So the day job, what do I do for a day job? Well, this is the dull bit. You can all use Google, so I'll keep it brief. But as it said on the press release, I founded Alandi in 2008 and then went on to raise over £1 billion to invest in often overlooked communities across the UK. I think it's fair to say we've had our successes and we've had our failures. But as Steve Jobs once said, without the experience of long-term ownership and engagement, getting things wrong and making mistakes, you don't earn the scar tissue that teaches you more than you'll ever learn as a consultant or an advisor. And this is really important in the makeup of the High Street Task Force board. They're all doers. They're not consultants or representatives of industry bodies, and dare I say it, even academics, guys. But people who have real experience of delivering change. We don't claim to have all the right answers, but we definitely have discovered some of the wrong ones, and we certainly know the right questions to ask in a fast-changing world. So why take on this role? Amongst the very humbling avalanche of support and kind words from literally hundreds of people over the last week, more than one person suggested I must be bonkers for taking on such a daunting role. These concerns were partly on account of my demanding day job, and also because it's only a couple of months since I nearly died of a brain hemorrhage. But these two things are actually related, if you'll bear with me on my explanation. Building a business is a bit like having kids. If you do it well, at some stage, you're going to realise, but it's always after them, that they don't need to rely on you anymore. And in my forced absence from Alandi, the world kept turning and they've gone from strength to strength. And I can assure you, although I don't recommend trying this at home like I did, nearly dying is a great way to focus the mind on what is important in life, what your purpose is, and what you want to achieve. At Alandi, our vision and purpose is to create the UK's most sustainable and inclusive communities. So how can I not jump at the opportunity to lead what I genuinely believe to be the most concerted and well-funded attempt to rebuild our towns and high streets since the Second World War? The High Street Task Force initiative is not just another report. In fact, it's not a report at all. Although, to be fair to John Timpson, the task force was one of his key recommendations in his 2018 report. As mentioned by Simon, the task force is now in place until 2024. It's fully funded, and we will deliver on our initial aim of boosting local capacity, building placemaking skills, coordinating the many groups responsible for community places, and providing data and sharing best practice, or as I prefer to call it, celebrating success. And to be fair to government, they are backing this with additional cash, as already mentioned, £750 million in future high street fund monies and over £2 billion in town fund monies. Being honest with you, is this enough to fix every high street in the country? No, it's not even close. But to be fair, it's not a bad start. And many of these much needed projects will be starting on site next year. I'm further encouraged by some of the amazing, even brave initiatives that I've seen across the UK, both in my role at Alandi and my role previously as president of Revo. In no particular order, I'm proud that Alandi has been involved in exciting projects, including the Eagle Lab initiative in Southampton City. Here we took the upper floors of an old department store, and in collaboration with City Council and University, we came together with Barclays to create a funky, flexible co-working incubator space to encourage graduates to stay in Southampton rather than join the brain drain to London. In Gloucester, we collaborated with the LEP, which is led by my fellow Task Force board member, Di Savory, to establish the UK Digital Retail Innovation Centre that was in an redundant old food court. Last year, we helped Stockton Council take a very brave decision to buy not one, but two fairly crappy shopping centres in their town. Whilst this may sound like madness, the plan is inspirational and makes a lot of sense. It's based on the fact that if you decant all the tenants from one scheme into another, not only will you create a single vibrant retail hub, but release a prime riverside development site with potentially stunning public realm access to the river. Most recently, we've been involved with working alongside Folkestone Borough Council to buy a failed department store where the plan is to transform it into a high street anchor fit for the 21st century. This will be delivering healthcare, the cinema, blended community space, and later living. And whilst I'm enthusiastic, I think it's fair to say I'm not a happy clapper. I have the scar tissues that Steve Jobs talked about, and frankly know the situation in our towns and high streets is probably going to get worse before it gets better. But based on everything I know and feel, and frankly the level of engagement shown by how many of you have joined us on this webinar, I am optimistic that this initiative and others will be the start of real change. So finally, I want to make a promise to you personally. In the announcement last week, the local government minister, Simon Clarke, welcomed my appointment with the comment, "I know Mark will be a strong voice," his words not mine, "in ensuring local businesses and communities will get the support they need. Those who know me well will probably think this is a comment he may live to regret. But I can state now, with the full support and commitment of the board, that we're all here to make good on that statement. We are here to make sure that you get the tools and support you need to make your towns and high street places we can fall in love with again. Genuinely, we are here to serve you, learn from you, and listen to you. So please, let's make this a start of a journey and a conversation. And I very much look forward to hearing from you. Many thanks. Back to you, Simon.
Thank you, Mark. Our next speaker is Matt Davis, who is our communications lead, who will look at some of the things the task force now provides. Matt.
Thank you, Simon. Good afternoon, everyone. Hopefully the sound levels are okay, but if they're not, pop a message in and we'll experiment with the levels. So good afternoon, everyone. As you've registered for today's webinar, you'll all have found our relaunched website by now, but you may not have explored what's available yet. So I'm just going to provide a very quick overview of some of our online resources which can help to support your local recovery and transformation efforts. So firstly, if we just look at the website here, if you select, and you may have found this already, COVID-19 in the navigation, these resources are specifically addressing response to the pandemic. For example, the COVID-19 recovery framework, which Simon will talk a little bit to today. And if we move on further, this particular framework is one that the government proposed that local authorities consider in the guidance for the Reopening High Street Safely Fund. And the page here will talk you through the resource, but it will also give you options to download supporting materials. So there'll be PowerPoint files and instruction documents there to help you out. You'll see also on the COVID-19 index page that we've added further advice on that particular Reopening High Street Safely Fund. And indeed, we'll continue to add more pages here, starting after this webinar with information on footfall counting. If we move on to the next slide, if we look at the support section on the website, here you'll find some more information about what we're offering to high streets. So this is both the direct support that we're working with specific high streets that we select alongside MHCLG, but also the support that's available online. I just want to focus on the framework section for a moment here. All of our work at the task force is underpinned by knowledge frameworks. You can see them on the screen here as I've clicked through. These are based in research and evidence that we've collected from high streets and from place leaders. As you'll know, this webinar series includes the transformation routemap framework, but I just want to give you another example. So the 25 vital and viable priorities. These are 25 priorities that are drawn from 237 factors, which were identified through research as impacting high street performance. So you can get an overview of what these factors are on this page here. You'll get an introduction. But importantly, and you'll find this throughout the site, there are also links to e-learning resources throughout these pages. So these are more interactive guides, essentially, that you can work through. You can see here the e-learn for the vital and viable resource. And these are interactive guides, essentially, and they'll support you to digest and use some of this information and this research and sort of put it to work, I suppose, on your local high street. So we hope that you find those useful as well. If I just skip back to the main site here, it's worth saying that we have a resource library that you can access from the menu. So everything that you find on the site will be logged in this resource library. And you can either just browse through, you can see there's 3 of our latest resources on the screen here about footfall and so on. An example, a case study from St Helens, so there'll be quite a lot of variation in there. So you can either browse, or indeed you can search or use the filters that we have on the site, which are again aligned to the knowledge frameworks that I've been talking about. So we hope you'll find much that's useful inside that library. And just as I said, this is very, very quick overview. I'd advise you to go and have a look and explore, look around. But one thing we would advise you to do is to register with the task force. You can see the button in the top right of the screen there. Many of you, thank you, will have opted in already when you registered for this webinar. But if you haven't already, if you do that, what will happen is every Friday, we will update you about the new resources that we've placed on the website via our email newsletter. And often, as you know, things are moving quite quickly at the moment and topics are developing. So we may have a theme for that week, be it relating to government announcements or related guidance. So do sign up and register, and you'll get that newsletter, as I say, on Friday afternoons. So we really look forward to continuing to communicate with you and to support you via all of these resources online. And as I say, the last thing, I just urge you to go and have an explore of the website, see what you can find, and sign up, and we'll be in touch. And with that very quick introduction, I'm going to pass back to Simon now. So thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Sorry, try again. Right, thank you very much. I was going to have a look at the COVID-19 recovery framework, because this leads us into the routemap transformation. When COVID struck and the crisis occurred, we were concerned about how places were going to come through it and how place management was going to react to it. So our research team looked at some of the things that have been learned from risk management frameworks, disaster reduction frameworks, and attempted to introduce a systematic analysis of data, coordination, collective leadership and management that would actually mean that we could start to think about urban systems and to use that to predict, anticipate and adapt a recovery plan. And what we came up with and was published in early April was this 4-stage program that we were going to work through and work with people to see how it could be used for them. And we started obviously in crisis, where there was a lot of uncertainty, and we looked at actions that were going to be helpful through that crisis program. And the reaction we had from many people who we were working with, who were place managers, was they both agreed with many of the things that were there, but identified some other things that they felt they needed help in. So each of these was analysed, and we looked at the suggestions with additional guidance, which was on the website, about what these processes might be. It was really about ensuring that thinking started to take place. We weren't all frozen in paralysis by what was actually happening to us. And what happened is that many place management structures took this on board at that time, and not only changed some of their own practices and the way they were approaching things, but they worked with others in order to get them to buy into this concept of what should be important at that time. And then some of them, as we've seen from the case studies, then passed this back to their businesses and their community members. So they too got involved in understanding this process. A key part of this was signposting, making sure businesses could claim funding that was coming to them. It was reassurance about the fact that there was support that was there, and providing data and other things. And it was out of this first stage that I think that people got the confidence to then move on to what we called pre-recovery, because we felt we couldn't go from crisis straight into recovery. And there was a need really running slightly in parallel with the crisis to think about the future. So the pre-recovery again identified a number of steps that we felt were important. Clearly, some of those still continued from the earlier stage, the coordination, the communication, but we were interested in building capacity, because it's all very well having connections and talking to one another, but how can this be turned into something that would help with the making of the recovery plan, perhaps help with the reimagining of the place? So this capacity development, and we've seen very much evidence of this, communities coming together, businesses coming together, local authorities working with different partners, in order to say, we have now in this together got to plan for the future. So we provided advice on making recovery plans, and subsequently government themselves have put out plans for the reopening of high streets and thinking about the future. We've been supporting some of this with initiatives that have been taking place in town centres to put some of those businesses that were not previously online so they can continue to trade. So they're more resilient businesses when we come out of that. So there's been efforts in those areas, and we've very much looked at what has been happening around the country. Moving into recovery itself was about getting businesses operational again. And we had various experiences of perhaps retelling to people who were using these town centres what they were there for. In many instances, people who'd commuted to cities perhaps weren't as familiar with their local centre. And this attachment to your local centre through telling the story, getting them involved in the place, helping them to take pride, became important. And kindness was one of the things that was added by some of those we were working with, who felt there was a need to think about reintroducing people into the town centres in a positive way. So hence we had a lot of focus in recovery on tactical urbanism, things which meant that we weren't putting necessarily highway railings and bollards everywhere and big signs, but seeking to approach that in a much more positive way, whilst dealing with things like cleaning and managing social distancing. So this then takes us in various ways to transformation. And we felt that underlying all of this was got to be the premise that we don't want towns, we don't think towns can go back to being what they were. Recovery in itself is not enough. It had to lead to something else and something different. And there are various challenges that come from further afield that are pressing on our town centres, as we know. So how could we use this whole process of partnership, of working together, of understanding things to lead to transformation? So that is what is going to now take us into looking at the route map in a short while. But it's the sense that you make the most of these partnerships, these new connections. You start to think together and work together to develop a vision, taking into account many more perhaps views and ideas than we would have done before. But we also have to think about the funding and investment. And whilst there's some of that been there from government, there are further funds coming forward. We have to think about how those partners we're working with can also provide support for that funding. So hopefully, if you've not been using our COVID framework, you can get a sense of it from that, but you can still access it on our website. And it's actually, we have guidance and you can adapt it for your own place. You can change some of these icons, you can add things in, and that is the way that it's been doing. And we'll hear in a short while from Canterbury about how they made use of it. But the details are there on the website, and we'll now pause because I'm not sure if we have got very many questions put up yet, Tom, but I was going to answer some questions, or the team were. If anybody wants to post questions, have you heard that? Just put them in the Q&A and we'll try and get you a response to those. No,
yeah, we don't have any questions in yet, Simon. So would you like to just carry on?
Yeah, we can add that to the question time at the end. We'll move on to Lisa.
Great. Thank you, Simon. And it's a pleasure to join this panel today. Thank you for inviting me. I just want to spend a minute telling you about Canterbury, in case you don't know a huge amount, just to put the city into context for what we're going to talk about. We're relatively small in geographical size, but in normal times we have the largest student to local population ratio in the whole of the UK, due to our 3 universities. And we would also normally welcome about 7.8 million visitors to the city, and that's according to the Cambridge model. Over 50% of our businesses are independent, and we also have an open air shopping centre in the city. We're a UNESCO World Heritage Site, comprising the Cathedral, St Augustine's Abbey and St Martin's Church, and we were about to commemorate this summer the 850th anniversary of Thomas Becket's murder, along with hosting the Lambeth Conference and the Gulf Open in nearby Sandwich. So, you know, a huge disappointment for us this summer, but we hope to have an opportunity to do it over again next summer, but we'll see. We're less than an hour from London, and we're just in that corner of England that almost touches France, except we can't right now because it's too difficult to get there, and we can't that easily welcome visitors at the moment either. So on the one hand, Canterbury has a lot to offer, but we have a lot to lose as well. So you know, I believe we will adapt and transform, and we've seen it already just over the last few months. But we need to think really carefully about this journey at a local, regional, and national level. And that's why it helps to have a framework. So I'm just going to spend a few minutes talking about, oh, bear with me, about why we have adapted the IPM's framework. I'm jumping the slides around a minute, I'll just keep talking, here we are. As the crisis unfolded, we did jump straight onto the BID Foundation webinars, IPM, ATCM. I sit on the board of the ATCM and chair the Southeast Network. And of course, the ATCM is part of the High Street Task Force. So this all links together. We're all kind of in this together, trying to learn from each other. And we benefited a lot from the pioneering work and knowledge sharing, which is why these forums and the way we meet now are so important. So we spent some time in the recovery framework early on, working through it alongside our business plan, because we wanted to make sure that we could still deliver for our levy payers on what we promised, but that we were taking this context, the crisis, into account, and that was our overarching strategy. And so we spent some time doing that, which led us to a document that we now use to help us shape and adapt how we have to change our projects and activities. But I want to talk about 3 reasons why we felt we needed to use this framework. Number one, it enables shared learning. We're all in this together, and this is a global crisis. And it makes sense to take advice from place management experts and to learn from each other, and to use something that so many other towns and cities are using and will be using. It's not something we've just made up to fit into our business plan. It's something that has been thought through, and we can continue to learn from each other, but also take into account our own local considerations. So number 2, I think for us, this enables collaboration with the organizations around us who are making decisions that impact us. So that's our local authorities, our destination management organizations, our chamber, inward investment organizations, and other business groups, but especially, of course, our business community and our local resident and civic groups. So, you know, even though we're not necessarily responsible for each element in the 4 stages of the framework, we have to know who is and how we can work together. So that's how, for us, it enables the collaboration and strong partnerships. And thirdly, the framework enables us to deliver on our business plan, which we still have to do, but in the context of the crisis. So it means that we can adapt our projects and activities, and we have developed a strategic document that we use at board level. It's a live document. We track the projects that we had promised to deliver and how we need to adapt and change and why. And this framework helps us to do that. So this is just I'm showing you just the first graphic that in this document that we use to track how we're adapting and changing. So it's taking us from the IPM's framework into what we're adapting at a local level. And just skipping ahead a second, I wanted to touch a bit on one of the first things we did as a result of this was to, and I apologize, it's entirely my fault for these slides jumping around. The first thing we did was to take all our training events and operational meetings online, and then we introduced new webinars and sector group meetings, because it's essential that we were hearing as much as possible from our businesses, that we needed to listen well. And when I say our business, for us, it's everyone who pays a levy in Canterbury City Centre. So that could be a shop, a restaurant, a church, a school, our local authority. It's everyone. And we need to make sure we were listening early on. We also continue to participate in the webinars like this, BID Foundation, IPM, ATCM, they're doing a blueprint. We're doing a blueprint for resilience series on YouTube. Also Basecamp with all that policy analysis, and now we've got the High Street Task Force. So there's so much resource that we have. And some of you on this webinar will probably, as I scroll through, see some of the things that you know, we've adapted from what you've shared in sessions like this. And you know, it's in normal times we don't have the time to meet as we do now, but now we have to. And I think that's absolutely right, because we can learn so much from each other. And if I think about the main learnings from those webinars that we've run, are actually guiding principles. It is collaboration, leadership, and adaptability. And these learnings are based on the feedback that we've had from staff in businesses, from managers, from owners, and also from customer perception surveys. You know, we have to work together. None of us have a crystal ball to see into the future, but we have to lead and do the next right thing. And that's what we've seen businesses do over the last few months, and what we as well have to do in place management. And we have to be flexible and be prepared to change. And just a small example of that is our Marks and Spencer changed their entry and exit about 3 times over the course of lockdown for the part of the shop that could stay open, the food store. And they did that based on staff feedback and customer feedback. So they were listening. And we can apply that as we reopen more across the rest of our towns and cities to footfall, queue management, and so on. So some of the other things we did straight away is we adapted all our marketing and promotion and went online, as I'm sure everyone did. And we saw a commensurate increase in terms of what we were doing and the take up and engagement with that. People were really thirsty and wanted to support local. So groceries delivered to your door, meals delivered, retail shopping, supermarkets, pharmacy, opticians. This was to support businesses who could stay open in some way, shape or form, but also to support the local community who needed it. And this was across B2B and B2C communications. And this has now evolved, of course, this week to include reopenings and the stay safe, keep smiling messaging, that we want people to come, but we want them to feel welcome, but we want them to feel safe. And that goes for both customers and staff. We then also produced a reopening guide, which we worked on together with our city council. And this not only has the national level information, but the local information as well about parking and toilets and hand sanitizer and signage and, you know, outdoor tables and chair licensing, which I'm sure we're all still trying to work through. And that was really important because we needed to try and have as much as possible in one place. And that's a live digital document that can be updated. We developed downloadable welcome posters. Some of you may recognize these because this is an idea that I either got in one of these webinars or from the ATCM's Basecamp. And we've distributed a lot of these this week. And they tie in really closely with the floral pavement vinyls that we sourced from City Dressing. And those have gone down really, really well this week. It just helps people to feel welcome and helps remind people what to do, because the vast majority of people want to do the right thing. They just don't quite know how. And we're all having to relearn about how to be shoppers. We've also vinyls vacant units. So here you see one of our vinyls going up. This is our Debenhams site on the right-hand side of your screen, if I've got that right. And also we've put up some maps. So our Debenhams closed in January and it takes up a huge amount, about 70 windows. And it is being redeveloped and going through planning, but in the meantime, we can use it to make people feel welcome, to put up images of things that should have happened this summer and just to remind people about what's on offer in Canterbury. But I think the other thing that we have to do and that we've been doing this week is that we have to be present. We have to be out and about in the city centre. So now that it's safe to do so, we are walking around greeting businesses because nothing replaces seeing it for yourself. We went around with the police, with our Lord Mayor. That was probably the first time I wore normal work clothes in a couple of months, I think. Normally it's a nice top and jeans, as we're all existing on Zoom and things like that. but we were, in fact, right after this webinar, we're going back out with colleagues from the City Council to see how things have gone this week, to prepare for the weekend, and just to continue to engage and listen. So the work that we're all doing to adapt, and that the business community is doing to adapt, is absolutely essential. And I think the framework, the recovery framework, from our board's perspective as well, is important, because it means that we have a strategy, we acknowledge the crisis, and we can demonstrate good governance, which is so important as we adapt going forward as a business improvement district. So that's all from me. Thank you very much for having me, and I look forward to these webinars going forward.
Thank you, Lisa. Hopefully that provides a background really to what we have been doing through the COVID crisis. But now we come to the route map, and to explain this to us is Kathy Parker, who's the research lead with the task force. Kathy.
Thank you, Simon. There's an opportunity through recovery planning to rethink what our places can become, and also to think about other long-term agendas as we come out of a period of crisis and adapt to these really new conditions. For example, some of the temporary measures that have led to road closures could become more permanent features. They might mean there's more space for recreation and leisure, which will help places address the long-term goals of becoming carbon neutral. Therefore, we've got to ask, where do we want recovery to take us? Back to where we were? Or is there an opportunity to rethink what we want our centres to be? Simon and Lisa have already talked about the recovery framework, and because it's been so widely adopted, we've been able to learn from the towns that have used it, that have responded quickly and have been innovating and doing things differently, involving the council, the community and businesses working together. And we've identified 4 common themes to help us understand how to navigate from crisis to recovery. And a lot of these things are things that Lisa has already touched on. Effective partnerships. In Norwich, for example, there is already existing partnerships to manage the crisis, but the bid and the to manage the city centre, but the bid and the council formed new structures, which they call plan ahead teams, to ensure that the response enabled businesses and local government to align around the government stage recovery process. Many places have adopted and agreed a recovery plan or a framework with a wide group of stakeholders, as we've already heard. And sometimes they've used the COVID-19 recovery framework, but where they have used it, they've always adapted it to meet local priorities and approaches. It's not just taken it and just applied it as it was. And whatever plan they've been using, people knew about it, and really importantly, they knew their role in the plan. So for instance, in Worcester, all the departments of the council and the bid are using the same plan, but everybody knows what their part is in that. Communication is important, as we've heard. Webinars, newsletters, phone calls, social media, keeping people in touch and informed. Warrington ran a Back in Town campaign. It was led by the Business Improvement District. It reached out to the businesses, it worked through issues that they identified, but it also reached out to the customers, even though they weren't in the town at the time, surveying them, keeping them informed, all under the same brand, the same campaign, very much focused on the end goal, which was bring people back to town. And lots of action. This hasn't been planning for the sake of it. There's been a lot less talking and writing and a lot more doing. You can go on the High Street Task Force website and see a great example of a project that was completed quickly. It's the case study of Leamington Spa and their commissioning and deployment of social distancing flowers, the same type of flowers I think that Lisa's used in Canterbury. And that's a great example of what we've been talking about, this shared learning, observation, decision, action, evaluation, dissemination. A cycle that might normally take 12 months or 24 months has been done just like that. Very professional, very inclusive, but very quick. So effective partnerships, adopted plans, open communication, and lots of action. That reminded us of something. In 2014, we conducted a really big research project with 10 UK towns to investigate different regeneration strategies. And we identified 4 approaches to town centre renewal. We call these the 4 R's: Restructuring was all about getting partnerships and governance right, including those processes governing any large-scale spatial restructuring. Repositioning was about understanding change in a place, using evidence and data, and developing quality visions. Rebranding was about engaging people and changing perceptions through communication. And reinventing was about changing the offer of the town, activating the space, and making things happen. What we've seen with the COVID crisis is that these approaches are still very relevant, even in the context of a pandemic. You have to have the right people and structures, the data and the evidence to make the right interventions, plans that people believe in, good communications to bring people with you, as well as healthy debate. And that has to be combined with an action-oriented culture to change things, to make things happen. But this needs coordinating across all the silos and sectors and interests. I'm just having a look at the questions as they come in. A lot of the questions and the frustrations are about this. In times of crisis, lots of individuals and organisations come forward to do their bit, but the effort and capacity needs some organisation. And that's what place management or place managers do. You might call it something different in your town, but you do need people to coordinate who have good relationships with others across the council, business, and the community. So if we know what's enabled some places to respond well to the crisis, and we also know what helps places regenerate, we can apply these 4 Rs to make a route map from recovery to transformation. Because we know the 4 Rs are helpful both operationally and strategically. So over the next few weeks, we're going to focus on these. We're going to focus on restructure or leadership and governance. COVID has brought all sorts of people and groups together to work in a way they haven't before. We must build on these and use it as an opportunity to refresh our town centre partnerships. Perhaps new leaders have emerged from the bid or the community. Make sure that you involve these people in your partnerships. Developing a collaborative vision. People don't want to go back to the old normal. How can we build more ambitious visions that make places greener, fairer, and happier? And how can you incorporate new data and evidence? And how will this translate into your strategies and plans? It's been really interesting to see the photos on Twitter that have shown some of the perhaps unnecessary interventions to manage social distancing. And by this, I mean sort of empty shopping malls, which are completely empty of people, and yet everything's telling people to walk one way and not cross between shops. Some rural high streets I've seen on Twitter looking more like crime scenes with hazard tape and cordons and that all over the place. It's absolutely correct that temporary measures are used to manage social distancing, but we must check that they're really necessary. That's what the data and evidence is for. We want to welcome people back to the high street safely, not scare them away. Your local businesses, bids and community groups can be your eyes and ears on the street and help do this monitoring and evaluation. Footfall data is crucial to ensure you're dealing with the same facts and not just people's perceptions of busyness. Placefulness. We define this as the emotional attachment people have to your place. What makes it special and unique? What do people value? The human and small scale everyday attributes of places have been really important under COVID-19. The corner shops, the community and volunteer groups, clapping together with neighbours for the NHS. Let's not lose this placefulness. Let's make sure it gets built into the transformation journey. Because there's been no precedent for the situation that we've been in, we've had to make it up together, sort of as we go along, if you like. But that's a really healthy approach to take forward. We need to hear from different people to understand their concerns and build consensus. Too many plans for transformation have failed, and they'll continue to fail because they're not owned and delivered by a critical mass of people. And back to my original point about what are we trying to move to? About having an end game, eye on the end game. We're trying to move away from monofunctional shopping centres to multifunctional community hubs, places that people are proud to call home, somewhere where the economy works for everyone, which is livable, fair, sustainable, and resilient. And this is worth working for. Don't be complacent. Keep working towards this goal. We are collectively the high street task force. We can do this. There's over 500 people on this call. It's an incredibly powerful force for change. So whilst each of the 4 R's represents a component of place transformation, it's not a linear journey. You're going to be doing some of these things in parallel, and the circumstances will mean that you'll put more effort into some things at certain times. We're going to come back to the route map at the end of the webinar series and give you a really practical way to use it once we've covered the 4 R's and the content around those. And we're going to focus, as I said, on 1 per week over the next 4 weeks. And throughout the series, we'll link to other relevant funds like the Opening Up Safely Fund, Future High Street and Towns Fund, so that you can coordinate and come up with a place-based approach to transformation that can integrate these other funding sources, your existing plans, your community's aspirations, everything really. That's the whole point of the framework. So what's next? Well, we're starting to see some signs of recovery. Outside London, footfall on Monday, the day that non-essential retail opened, was about 65% of footfall for the same period last year. And I've taken London out of the equation because the footfall is so low on London. In London, it drags everywhere else down. So a bit more positive if we take that London out of the sample. We believe that monitoring footfall is crucial right now. We just don't know if pre-COVID levels are going to return. But as with any high street metric, footfall is hugely place specific. So you need to know what's happening in your town centre on your high street. Knowing UK or England's averages aren't going to help you. On Monday, we saw some towns have a 20% more footfall than they did the same time last year. So that's all the footfall they had this last year on that same Monday, plus another 20%. But then there are other towns that only saw 20% of their footfall return on Monday. So a huge difference. And that's why you need to know what's happening in your town. And that's why this week's activity is focused on footfall. Every week we're going to post resources and reference those in the email that Matt talked to you about, so that you've got something to do in the week that's going to be focused on your transformation. If you don't have footfall data, we think you need to get it. So we've got instructions on the website for those local authorities who'll be using footfall as a baseline for your reporting to MHCLG on the Opening Up Safely Fund. And that just tells you how, where and when to do one baseline count. We've got instructions on joining our manual footfall counting regime. This is instructions for taking multiple counts, 3 hours over 3 days and 3 months. And this enables us then to estimate your annual footfall volumes, your town type, and your weekly and daily usage profiles, and compare that to what's happening in similar towns and around the rest of the country. And this will be available to you through a standard dashboard if you want one. And if you do have footfall data, that's the data supplied from Springboard in particular, then you can register for an advanced dashboard, and it's all the same link on the website that we'll be sending out. It'd be really helpful if people indicate if they're interested in one of these dashboards, so we can establish the likely demand. And all the information about these products is on the website, and it will be featured in the email, as I said, that will go out just after the webinar with all the links you need. Thank you, Simon.
Thanks very much, Kathy. We have now some time for questions. We've had quite a number that have been posted. Some are quite detailed, looking for specific information. And what we will seek to do in our roundup email to you is to address some of those questions. But there were some which were, a number of them looking at similar themes, one of which was about local leadership. The absence of it perhaps from some of the local bodies who might have been expected to provide it, and the difficulties really in starting and maintaining partnerships. Both of those things are topics that are going to come up as we work our way through this route map transformation. We believe there's an absence of capacity in most towns in terms of dealing with the crisis and dealing with the path to transformation. We're going to look at how you build leadership. We're going to look at how you actually also get involved very carefully in building partnerships. We've seen a lot of action in groups coming together in towns because of this need that the sense of crisis has driven people to work together, and that has to go forward. But yes, partnerships are not easy things to put together. You have to do a lot of work to agree on where you're going, and you actually have to start to trust one another. I don't know whether any of my other panelists want to comment on the concept of partnership and leadership there. Lisa, maybe.
Yeah, I was just thinking about that, and also about one of the questions that came through about the engagement of national chains. Yes. in all of this. And in my experience, everybody wants to get involved. It's a question of now having the time, and you know, because a lot of businesses haven't been able to trade in the same way, they have more time to engage, and also because there's a very specific need. So, you know, historically, before the crisis, a number of businesses or groups might have thought, that's great, you put up Christmas lights, you do hanging flower baskets, you help with cleaning, don't need to get more involved. But now there is a need to engage even more. So from the national chain perspective, we've always seen them want to get involved, maybe some restrictions from a national level about how they can. But our first webinar was with the manager of our local Boots and M&S, and so, you know, that was really, really important because they'd been open the whole time and were able to talk about that. But in terms of other engagement, it's been really important for us to get involved with our local authorities and our resident and community groups, and that's just a lot of hard work, and it takes time. And it's hard to find the time, but you know, we have to show up. We have to show up at resident group meetings. We have to show up at council committee meetings, and we have to get to know each other. And there's no shortcut.
Okay, thanks for that. One of the other questions was about evidence about pedestrianisation, and I think it's quite interesting that talking about this, we've got two pressures that seem to be affecting town centres now. One is in many cities across Europe, and indeed in this country, much larger areas are being given over for pedestrians. This means limiting cars going into centres. The City of London is one of the places that is leading on this, but other places are doing it as well. Indeed, in Milan, they brought forward their vision for pedestrianised areas by 2030 to implement at this time in order to ensure social distancing. And yet data is telling us that people are still nervous of going into town centres and they want to drive in. So I think we're going to have two pressures over time here, but I think ultimately the force for the idea of more space for people, the thoughts, the impact of the reduction of carbon is going to mean that we're going to see a much more pedestrian priority created in town centres.
I think another thing, as we look to how the world of work might change, because of the implications of COVID, with people not wanting to travel into cities so often, maybe working from home 2-3 days a week is commonly being discussed in business now. That means people are going to be based far more locally for work, which hopefully means they're going to be using their local services, which are much more accessible on foot or by bike than previously, certainly within a large urban conurbation, for example, but also in small towns as well. So I think there is a real opportunity for many of our towns, high streets and suburbs to really capitalise on some of these changes that are going to happen to make it more hyper-localised.
Thank you, Mark. There's also been a question about social distancing. Again, one of the big issues in many town centres has been creating the space, and it's been very important to think about in some places one-way systems, places people can wait where there's not large congestion coming. There's been quite a good guidance put out by government, both for social distancing within premises, but also social distancing in the public areas. You can find that on our website, on the Task Force website. Have a look at that. We've also written quite a lot and pulled various articles together about how this is being done, about emerging best practice, some of the issues, and how you might do this, again, in a more sociable way. So you will find information on that. Just a couple of things before we draw to a close. As I say, we will send you some follow-up to this, but a few of you are asking about the support that the task force is making available. Is it limited to a certain number of towns? We have this online presence. This will become a very a large body of resources, support, guidance, advice, which will be available to all people, whether they're in a local authority, in a place leader, or a single business. And some of that advice will explain how businesses themselves can get involved, the community themselves can get involved. We have business associations, we have Civic Voice, who we're working with as part of this as well. We will be then identifying places that have the highest need to provide a greater level of support. And that will start really as soon as we are free of the restrictions on movement around the country and larger groups can gather together. We hope this has been useful. If I move on, Tom, to the next slide. Next week, we move on to start to think about the effective partnerships and why they are so important to build capacity for change. We'll look at the role of place management in the whole recovery and transformation process, some of the structures involved, how that may work. We'll look at the idea that some of the existing partnerships and governance arrangements need to change. We don't think necessarily we've got the answers at the moment. And so then also, when we think about restructuring, we think about the physical restructuring of towns and cities. And there are many more opportunities now appearing as space becomes available on our high streets. There will be that question in terms of restructuring about space for cars, space for public transport, space for people as well. So this all will form part of what we talk about next week. And this is the first step, as we heard from Kathy, of looking at each of these elements. So the next 4 webinars will look at each element in turn. We hope that's useful. Thank you very much for joining us.